We're going to do some color today. So I'm going to share our presentation here. I'm going to start again with a John Muir Laws quote because he's just amazing, and I want to keep calling back to this. So the practice of journaling draws us into a deeper relationship with nature. The observation and gentle, directed attention of keeping a nature journal is love. As you develop your own practice, I encourage you to be open to this aspect of the process. Let yourself fall in love and be aware of how it changes and moves you. Use it to empower you to stewardship, education, or a richer and more passionate relationship with the world. So I want to keep that in mind as our theme for closing out our main part of our teaching and learning. Although, remember, it's a lifetime of learning. This is not going to end. It's all about learning. So today I'm excited to sort of introduce this idea of really simple color. And you can buy huge palettes of 15, 20, 30 colors. And as someone pointed out, though, you spend a lot of time if you have a big palette hunting out just the right color, where if you kind of drill down to this triad method, you can quickly make really close to the color you want with just three to five colors, which is what I showed you yesterday. And therefore you're not hunting around for stuff and spending your time on that. That's just the way I do it. If having loads of colors makes you super happy, then by all means, go for it. I'm just showing you kind of how I've drilled down to this, and therefore I can carry all this with me in a really light package and not be weighted down. So I covered this a little bit, and I'll go a little deeper here. Simple, but good quality. So my brush is, my favorite brush is this Isa Bay Squirrel Mop Travel Brush. It's around $30 now. Rosemary brushes, and you can get those from Maria Coriel Martin's website, expeditionaryart.com. So it makes its own case. And this is, I think, 5 years old now, and it's not degraded. So it's squirrel hair, so it's not super expensive. And yes, it is squirrel. You can go with synthetic if you don't want to use animal product. Through the silver black line uses synthetic, and they're great. They're not breakdown, but you can cut the handle off if you want to make it smaller. Or a lot of people, John Muir Laws loves these, the Pentalic water brush, and I'll show you that. I'll demonstrate that. But I'm just personally a big fan of, you don't need 5 or 6 brushes or even 2 or 3 brushes to work in a nature journal. I actually have 3 or 4 of the folding brushes. I have a flat one, I've got big ones, fat ones, skinny ones. But I don't want to be like swapping them out all the time. So I get a good one with a nice sharp tip that can do little tiny lines, and it's fat enough I can do a wash in a simple nature journal. Then, as I showed you yesterday, I use my mini paint kit with 2 extra colors. I use a regular brush. I haven't mastered the water brushes. I really like my regular squirrel mop brush. So I use a little water reservoir, which is actually I made from my contact lens solution bottle, and converted that and put that in my little plastic palette holder. You're looking at my original palette holder in that photo. I originally made it so it would fold up so I could use it in even smaller journal, but I've never used that, so I have since gone to a non-folding one. Then I use microfiber cloths because I don't really like to throw away a lot of paper products. So the microfibers I have 3 or 4 that I keep in a mesh bag clipped to my field bag, and they'll last me for a full 2 or 3 hours. One will last me 2 or 3 hours painting, and then I could swap it out with another one that's dry. And they're washable. You're not throwing away something disposable. So this is a good example of the little palette that I have on the left, used with a water brush. You don't need an extra water reservoir, or you can make a water reservoir out of any kind of plastic thing. I glued a steel washer to the bottom of a plastic. I think that's just like a little plastic thing that like ketchup comes in for takeout. Or I used my, like I said, my contact lens solution thing. And then a little tiny spray bottle. And the spray bottles are great because when you use good quality paint in the little pans, any kind of dried paint like that, you need to spritz it first before you use it so that it refreshes. Only takes a minute or so, but it's good to spray it first and get it re-wetted before you use it. Just a little helpful tip. I use good quality pure pigment paint. So any of the brands such as Daniel Smith, Winsor Newton, Core, which is spelled Q-O-R, any of the top name brands, they are pure pigment. They don't have chalky filler, which your student grade or cheaper stuff that you get will have. So if you have trouble, if you're finding that you're trying to blend colors and your colors on your page are looking crappy, probably because they're not super good quality. So keep that in mind. These are also, in the end, far cheaper than the cheap stuff you get at Michael's or whatever, because one tube like that lasts months, a year. It's incredibly concentrated pigment and just blends beautifully and is well worth it. So one of those tubes is between $11 and $15 or $16, depending on the pigment, because pigments have different costs. So I highly recommend going with good quality and fewer of them, although I'm completely guilty of always, like, I love to buy paint. So, don't hesitate to have like extra palettes of fun, beautiful colors if that makes you happy. We went over this yesterday, which is great. So the triad method is using your cyan, magenta, yellow. So cyan is blue, magenta, red, and yellow. So those are your primary colors. And then, as we saw yesterday, you blend your secondary colors from your primaries. So if you look in between each primary, you'll see cyan or blue and yellow equals green. And the variations in between, if you put a little bit more blue in, it's bluey green or turquoise. If you put a little more yellow in, it's that pretty little yellowy green, and so on. So you can get a really nice red, for example, out of magenta if you add a little bit of yellow. And I'll show you examples of those. So here's an example of a page I did in the after visiting Bear Creek in North Tucson. I can get a huge range of colors out of just those colors I showed you, from beautiful deep black all the way to that gorgeous sky blue and everything in between. just from those little palettes. And I call the, so when I do those dots in my journal, I love doing that. It's really recommended. You might, when you get to a new area, you might do what I call a colorway, which are dots or little, you could do little rectangles or whatever in your journal to capture the colors that you're seeing. And that's what I was trying to do there, is show the incredible range of colors I was seeing. The creek wasn't blue water at all. It was this crazy copper color, which is common of the creeks in the Catalina Mountains outside Tucson. And here are like much different colors, same palette, same 5 colors, but very springy colors. So light purple, magentas, lavenders, bright greens, light greens, yellows. Oh, there's a good example on this page, by the way. See where I remember yesterday where I said, if you make a mistake identifying something or writing something in your journal, you can see about halfway down, I misidentified a plant. I thought it was tax stem. So instead of whiting it out, I drew a single line through it, and then I wrote the correct name under it. It was Raffinaceae neomexicana, chicory, not tax stem. So important, remember, for your, as a naturalist, you want to make sure that your field notes are readable no matter what, even if you make a mistake, just a single line. So you can see here the red I got on that lower left when I did the ladderback woodpecker head, that was made from magenta with a tiny bit of yellow, and then the black was from the Indanthrone and burnt sienna. But from the same color palette, I was also able to try to replicate the shimmery, coppery color of the cinnamon teal. So you can get a lot of range of colors from just very few colors in your palette. So I'm going to go over this way of painting that Mark Taro Holmes, who I mentioned yesterday, introduced. Well, it's not new to him. He's borrowed it from someone else, but he calls it tea, milk, and honey. So adding color in 3 stages of intensity and tone. And this will really improve, especially your landscapitos, but I also use it in many other things, leaves, plants as well. So he first lays down a very light wash of the lightest color with a lot of water. So in this case, looking at that little landscapito, it's a light yellow, well, first the light color of the sky in blue, and then a light yellow wash. And he calls that tea because it reminds you, by saying tea, it's like, well, tea is weak. It's not a lot of pigment in the water. So you let that dry, which in most cases, it doesn't take very long if you're doing a light wash. Then you add the medium tones in with more pigment. So kind of more like milk. So think of it as a little more opaque. You can't quite see, you've mixed quite a bit more pigment than the tea. So it's a little milkier, if you will. And those are the midtones. So here you can see in my little sketch, I've added more rock colors, the browns, I've thrown in a little of the medium greens and some darker yellows for the grasses. And then finally, he says, do your darkest tones last. This is just one way to do it. But it's a fun, good mnemonic for remembering. So do your darkest tones and thickest, meaning the most pigment in your water, in your palette, and use sparingly. So here I did the shadows of the volcanic rocks, throwing in the shadows and adding a little more interest. And so tea, milk, and honey is a good way to kind of think about how to apply what you're doing. Because sometimes when you're just starting out with color, it's like, oh, where do you start? Start with your light, then go medium, then go dark. Is a good way to start. Lots of different ways to do it, but that's one good way to start. So here's the kind of finished landscapito. And remember, we're capturing, not copying. I was there in the Pinacate volcanic range in northern Mexico, and I just wanted to capture those incredible rocks, that feeling of intense color, darkness, and the pretty green cacti and ocotillos with their red blossoms. So here's my favorite thing to remember though. And do I follow this? Well, no, I only follow it about 50% of the time. You need to learn when to stop and not overwork what you've done. Watercolor is, many people will tell you, it's one of the more difficult media to work with because it's fairly unforgiving. And if you go back over it and overwork it, it looks muddy and awful. So you have to learn to stop and not go too much farther. And it's really useful to stop before you think you're done and let it sit for a few hours a day or even a week before you go back. And you'll find that it actually looks pretty good. If you keep noodling, going back and back and back, you'll end up with a bit of a muddy mess. And that's so common. And, you know, I still need to put this stop sign up for myself because I just keep going, wanting to go back. So some of the tips I like to mention are: 1, watercolor equals water plus color. And you can control it and use your water as a tool. So you'll learn as you practice and practice, because all of this just takes doing and practice. You can start, I would recommend just not going too dark straight off the bat. You can always add a bit of color, especially if you're using transparent colors like I use. You can add a little layer after it's dry and enhance, but you can't take away as easily without it completely ruining a drawing. Although in the end, bright, strong color, good color, like in these pages, is much better than totally weak. You'll look at a weak page and you'll think, and that's because you haven't quite used enough pigment yet. So just keep experimenting and have fun with it, because I get a lot of joy out of watching a drawing come to life with some color, and it's quite addictive and fun. So I say, you know, highlight and splash. Don't just, you know, do like you're doing a coloring book and color in the lines. Make it a bit dynamic. You'll see the dingo there. Jonathan and I were in Australia for, we bought a Land Cruiser there in 2016 and went back for 3 years over time, only once a year. And, but we'd spend a month there exploring, and I wanted to see a dingo. And on our second to last trip, we were at this camp and a dingo appeared, a wild dingo, and he watched us. And so I sketched him. And so you can see from my painting, I wasn't coloring the lines. I like kind of splashed the color. I was trying to capture his incredible coloring. He's quite beautiful. And so he hung out and watched us for quite a while. So that was a really special entry to me. But I wasn't making it like super perfect. I wanted to capture what he was like. So remember some of the things I was saying. So using good paper meant that I could control the water and the color, and that good paint. cheap paint just doesn't work so well. And remember that there aren't any rules. If you want to use that palette that you got that has 30 colors, do it. I'm not saying that's not the way. I'm just showing you what worked for me and why. So I think what we're going to do now, for those of you who do want to play with colors, I'm going to demonstrate some of what we talked about yesterday of mixing colors, and you can color along using this. I'm going to have you do, like, first we'll do the blue, the magenta, the yellow, and then we'll try mixing and spend some time playing with color. And if you don't have color, you can just watch along and hopefully be inspired to try it out. So I think first I'm going to back up here. First, we're going to mix a little bit. Then either go back to your notebooks on the pages that we had yesterday, and we'll color in some things, or we'll just draw some fake leaves. But I'm going to stop the share now. At first, I'm going to ask any questions, which color always is like, ah. So any questions about that? Everyone want to jump in and just try color mixing?
I have a question. In another workshop, you used wax paper.
Ah.
Are you gonna?
I'll demonstrate that when I go to when we go from color mixing to my leaf. I'll show you how I use the wax paper to reserve the veins. It's kind of fun.
Okay, because I colored in. I started with the light colors on the veins that I did on the first evening. And then when I put the green in, the yellow veins sort of went away.
Oh, so a couple of things might have happened. You got to mark the side of the wax paper that has the wax. And if you got it backwards, then the wax is all in your pencil. Ask me how I know. Or you didn't press hard enough.
Well, what I mean is I used watercolor for the veins. They weren't white, they were sort of yellowish.
But then when you went over it just...
So it was really hard to not...
The wax would be awesome for that. Okay. And I'll demonstrate that. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
It's a fun little tip. Any other questions? All right, then I'm going to switch to the overhead camera.
I'm sorry, I just couldn't unmute myself. This is Sai. Hi. I just had a quick question about the paints. I'm using that mini tin. It was suggested to me I was not using enough pigment. I was using too much water because I grew up in a family that says don't waste. I was afraid of running out. No, seriously, like, you know, psychologist, I'm thinking all these issues. But what I noticed was, and I don't know if you can see it here, the red, anything I mix the red in, this was purple. It's faded out and I've got a red ring around the outside. So every color down to the yellow has faded out and it's got a red ring except for the one that I didn't use much water in. But none of those have any darker rings around them. So is that I use too much water and not enough pigment or what?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Because watercolor is suspended. So the pigment is suspended in the water. And when it floods out onto the paper, think of it like high tide line. So if you've got too much water, it's going to have it's gonna migrate out to the edges by gravity and settle there. So it's gonna settle into all the little nooks and crannies of the paper. So you want vibrant color, you have to have a bit more pigment. You'll get used to it. So I do recommend sticking with the same brand of paper and pigment for as long as you can, because it's all about habit, right? So if you're constantly bouncing around different paper, different pigment, it's like, what's the metaphor I want? It's like,
Fountain pens and ink. Not all inks work in all fountain pens because of all those little multi-factors. Got it.
exactly. So, you know, it's just like anything where the environmental factors change. And also, I've had to learn to adapt to different climates. So when I was visiting North Carolina, and I'm trying to paint there at Overland Expo, which Grace has been to in North Carolina. I'm like, my paper won't dry. This is awful. What the heck? I'm used to my paper drying in 2 seconds flat. However, that's the opposite. Was when I was learning to watercolor, I got some help from Mark Taro Holmes. I could not do a wash to save my life. And I emailed him because I was taking his class, and I'm like, dude, I'm following all your instructions. He's like, well, where are you? I'm like, in Tucson. He's like, well, your paper's drying before your wash is done and you're getting the streaks. And he said, that's okay. You know, it just takes practice in the environment that you're living in. So anyway, that's just to keep in mind. Just because what I'm doing is doing this here, it's not going to do the same thing where you are.
So the metadata includes humidity.
Yeah, and so watercolor is not the easiest media to use. It's very portable. We couldn't use oil because you do oil in your journal and it's just, you know, that takes days and days and days to dry. Acrylic, I'm not sure. I've never even heard of anyone using acrylic in nature journals. Colored pencils would be awesome because they're instantly dry. So, you know, keep that in mind, that watercolor is not the easiest, so be kind to yourself. But once you master it, it's super fast and fun. And it doesn't take all that long to master if you just stick with it and play with it. So I'm going to demonstrate, I'll demonstrate I'm just going to do a bit of color mixing, and then I'll come back and color in some of the things that I've got in my journal. All right, so I'm going to switch to the camera. Actually, I think I'm going to try something a bit different. So rather than share, hang on. There we go. That should work. We showing that now?
Yes.
Great. Is that filling up the screen pretty well?
Yeah.
There. All right. So I'm not going to demonstrate the water brush quite yet, because that's a little bit, well, what do you guys think? Who wants to see the water brush first? Take a vote. Yeah? Anyone curious about the water brush?
Yes, but second.
Second. Okay, I'll do that second. First, I'm going to show you, so my little watercolor palette that's stuck in the back of my journal here on the magnet. This is just coroplast. You can, after the election, you can go like liberate, politicians' signs from the roadside, right? Don't do it before, it's illegal. So I put my little metal paint palette there. This is my water reservoir that's like that, and my rag. And this actually holds my brush when I'm walking. Now I'm going to take this off though, because if I'm reaching over it the whole time, you can't see what I'm doing. So I'll be using a different system for the demo. So you can actually see what I'm doing. So I'm getting my brush wet here. I have, this is the little atomizer I'm refreshing the paints a little bit. So whatever paints you use, you want to do that just to give it a quick wake up. Oops, got my paper a bit wet. So I'm going to show, so I'm going to just do my pure colors first. I'm going to do, so you can see how rich, that's a lot of nice pigment there. And then I'm going to do my magenta.
Roseann, can you tell us the exact color and maybe brand that you're using there, just so we've got reference?
These are all Daniel Smith.
Okay.
And this is aureolin yellow.
Okay.
Quinacridone rose. And then I use manganese blue hue. So you can see how rich those are. But also notice, remember when I said about lifting versus staining? So if I put that on there, that can be lifted off really relatively easily if I get it soon enough, and wipe it off with a tissue or a rag. That's stained more than I normally would, because remember when I said about the cheap paper? This is that cheap paper. This is not my B paper. I'm out of B paper. I'm waiting for it to come in. This is that cheap paper, so it actually probably has some crappy stuff in it, so it doesn't lift as nicely as it normally would. So it's a good example. So now I'm going to do a green, which I want to get. I'm putting in some of my blue there. And then this is my mixing yellow, so I'm going to dip right in there and it gets kind of gnarly. But see how that makes a beautiful green there? Lovely green. And then I'm going to clean that out a little bit, which is just, I'm just dipping a brush in and swishing it around. We might want to mute ourselves because I think it's going to interrupt the feed if we don't mute. And then I'm going to do a blue and a magenta to get a purple. And to give myself some room, I'm just going to wipe this out. And so magenta and some of the cyan. Look at that. Ooh, that's so beautiful. Look at that color. Gorgeous. So I'm hoping you're trying your own. And then now we're going to do a magenta and yellow to get an orange. So I'm going to wipe this out so you can see what I'm doing. Sometimes I would just do it in my little side wells. By the way, I just created wells on my own using plumber's caulk, you know, caulking for your bathtub. I just made little wells. So I want some yellow, and now magenta in there to get an orange color. So let me also show the red. So bright red is hard. You know, that everyone's like, oh, I want a really good red. So I'm getting a lot of pigment, rich magenta there. And then I'm going to add just a touch of the yellow. I think I got too much water there. I got a little bit too much water, so I'm going to add more magenta. So you can see how this takes a little bit of practice. Water makes a difference. A little bit more yellow to get the perfect. So much more reddy red. Hopefully you can see that. So if I were to go now and do grays, I can add a little bit more yellow to this and get a much lighter orange, not quite light enough, huh? A more yellowy orange there, and so on. So, I add a little bit more yellow here. I'm gonna get a yellowier green, if that makes sense. Now, let me show, rather than go all the way around, I'm gonna demonstrate making black. Remember with the burnt sienna, whew, got a lot of pigment there. And then this warm, really dark indanthrone blue. Still not very dark, so I need more blue. Black needs quite a bit of mixing. Still kind of, a little bit too much blue. I'm looking at it here. I'm gonna add a tiny bit more burnt sienna. Ooh, that's darkening up nicely. So you can see, it's amazing, isn't it? Of the black. And then if I want that to be gray, I add a little bit more water and I get different shades of gray. And if I want a bluier gray, I'll add in a little bit more of that indanthrone. To get that steelier blue-gray. And then just so you can see what it looks like, that's what pure indanthrone looks like. Very beautiful. It's great for faraway mountains. And then I think I showed, so if you mix all your three primaries together, you can get a beautiful brown and a lot of shades in between. So let's see what that looks like. So mixing magenta, blue, and yellow. There's yellow. Let's add some blue. So there's your green, right? But then what happens when I dip some magenta in there? It starts browning up. It's not, I want it a little bit browner, so I'm going to add a little bit more blue. And you just keep mixing and adding till you get the brown that you like. A little too purple. Oh, there we're getting into some nice brown. Tiny bit more magenta gives me a beautiful earthy brown. I mean, you could do some amazing earth browns with that. So you can see everything in between just works so nicely with just a few colors. And that wild card dark blue, the indanthrone, is fantastic for, let me show you just an example of, let's do a basic, wow, that yellow's kind of gnarly. I'm going to clean out that yellow before I use it. So I swished in there and then I cleaned off my brush. It's looking pretty gnarly, isn't it? Yeah, it looks a little better. So there's a pretty bright green. But if, say I want to do a darker, bluier green, I'll just dip into that indanthrone. And look at that, I get a much darker, more say evergreeny green. So you add bits of other colors to things to alter the hue and coolness or warmness of the color. Warmer colors tend to recede in the background of your pictures. So like if you want a dark mountains in the background, warmer is better. If you want something to jump forward, you want it to be brighter and these cooler colors tend to jump forward. So that's just a quick demo of how you can mix so many different colors from just a few colors. It's kind of addicting, and I'll show you real quick since I have time. This theory works across many types of paints and pigment colors. So this triad idea. So here's these earth pigment colors of yellow ochre, red ochre, Maya blue, or lapis lazuli blue. So watch what happens when I do this lovely yellow ochre, which is a really wonderful color. Oops, too much water. Ochres don't like a ton of water. They're very dense, large particle pigments. So, but look at that pretty yellow ochre. But watch what happens when let me show you so here's the blue. So blue, Mayan blue has a great backstory. It's made from indigo, the indigofera plant, indigo, and mixed with some other natural elements. But Mayan blue is called Mayan blue because the Mayan Indians revered it, and they they coated the bodies of sacrificial people they sacrificed to the gods in blue, indigo blue pigment, and then threw them into they're called cenotes, the big wells of water. And amazingly, they're finding meters thick blue pigment and bones in the bottom of these cenotes. So it's kind of a gruesome color, but it's a pretty color here. But watch what happens after telling you that weird story. When I mix the yellow ochre and this indigo blue, use too much water there. I get this beautiful green. Isn't that lovely? So you can do these muted, beautiful triad colors as well. So the red ochre and the indigo will create a beautiful black brown, kind of dark brown as well. So just so you know, this triad thing can work across a lot of colors. And so go to Jane Blundell with 2 L's.com, and she can guide you into this rabbit hole of amazingness. So now I think what I'll do, so I'm going to stop for a minute, take questions, and then I'm going to color some of the things that I drew yesterday. So, questions.
There's a question in chat from Mary Sue. Do you use a separate brush for each color?
Nope. I am dipping and cleaning the brush. So the process looks like this. I'm going to go back to my share. So the process, so, you know, normally my little palette would be up here, you know, where I have my, but so here's my rag and my water. And the process looks like, where'd my color go? You know, dip in my color, paint, dip in my water, run it on the brush, grab a new color, add that to the palette kind of thing. And if I need to wash, dip, you know, so you're kind of constantly using your rag. So a lot of people with their water brushes as well use, remember there's things that people used to wear on their wrists for playing tennis, their terry cloth thingies, what do they call those? Wrist cuffs. Make fantastic ways to clean your brush. I don't do that because I hold my notebook with this hand and it doesn't work for me, which is why I came up with my little palette that sticks up the top, but it works well for the water brush. Oh, let me demonstrate the water brush real quick.
So may I add a question to that, Roseann?
Go ahead.
So what I'm confused about, I see all the different colors, but when you're coloring something, like what if you want something orange, then you have to go back, do the red and yellow again and do an orange, and then you want something blue and you have to go back and do the blue again. That's why I asked about different colored brushes.
Oh, so I'll show you when I demonstrate, like when I'm doing a scene, I'll probably do as many yellow, like if I know I'm doing light yellow, I'll do most of them all at the same time. And then I'll go back and I'll do most of the greens, working up to the darkest colors at the end. So I'm not going across the little landscape or whatever linearly. I'm doing it by color.
Okay, I get it. Thank you.
Yeah. So the way these water brushes work, if you haven't used them, so they're really inexpensive. This is $8, I think. This is the Pentel, Pentel. The water is plastic. The water is contained in the reservoir here. And the way you fill it up, so it took me forever to learn this. I finally had to see a video online because it doesn't come with any instructions. Some people were saying you use a syringe and you like add the water in here, but there's a much easier, faster way. You squeeze it to expunge the air and you've got your water reservoir, and just then let go and it sucks it up. I squeeze it again, stick it in, let go, and there, now it's full. It took me forever to learn that one. It's not intuitive. So the idea is these synthetic fibers at the end, and Pentel has the best points and fatter, nice round pointy tips. Some of them are just not pointy enough and they're not gonna be good to use. So you can add water to the brush by just gently squeezing like that. Take some practice getting used to how much water comes out. So I'm going to turn the page here. So using my rag here, which would normally be tied to my palette up here. I would never put a wet rag on my paper normally, but I want you to see what I'm doing. So I'm going to get some yellow here, and let's make some orange. I'm not really squeezing very hard at all. But there's a nice orange. Oops, you're there. You're seeing the orange there. And then to clean a water brush, you squeeze and dab and squeeze and dab until it's clean. So now I can paint the yellow so it's clean. So I'm squeezing water and dabbing. So you don't need an extra water reservoir with a water brush. You've got your water in here. It takes some practice. John Muir Laws loves it. Oops, see, this is why you wouldn't ever put that on there. So I use it sometimes when I'm maybe in a bit of a rush, but I haven't mastered it well. And but loads of people love them. So experiment, see what works for you. And it's quite convenient, really. Great for traveling. You know, you can pull it out on a plane and do some quick sketching on a plane and not have to worry about a water reservoir either. So if there aren't any more questions, I will jump over to show how I might color in these using this system. So here's a tip on especially doing leaves and trees. You might do what's called an underwash, because this is a bright green leaf, but it has, because green has yellow undertones, I'm going to do a quick yellow underwash first and let that dry a little bit. And I'll show you why that works nicely. Since this is the same, I'll let that dry while I do that. It's just a bit of a tip to easily get more depth in your painting easy on. So while that's drying a little bit, because I don't want to paint over that yet, I'm going to go ahead and do the sky over here. So with the sky, I sometimes go over it first with clear water. So it helps facilitate the color flowing more smoothly. And then if I also want to try to show some clouds, it's a little bit easier because you get softer edges. I'm not going to go into this whole thing about, you know, wet and dry and all of that. That's a much more advanced thing we don't need to worry about right now. But just remember that if your paper is wet, the color is going to go everywhere where it's wet. If there's a hard edge where it's dry, it's cool. The color tends to stop right there if you're using good paper. Cheaper paper doesn't do that. So I get some of my cyan blue, but I'm watering it down. And now I'm gonna run it really quickly in here. It's already pre-wet, so it's blending nicely. It's not, oops, so you saw the lifting there where I blorked it. I'm not gonna do any clouds today. So that gave a nice even color because I pre-wetted a little bit. If I put too much water, you're going to get what's called blooms. And blooms are when, I'll show you, if we've got too much water and not enough pigment. it's gonna do some funky stuff here. I'll show you that in a minute. As it dries, it's gonna kind of go a bit wonky. That'll become apparent in just a few minutes. It's called blooming. So while that's dry, see, I'm in Tucson, so this is pretty much dry now. I'm gonna mix a nice green. And so since I've used the blue, I've got some, this was a bright green leaf, so I want it to be nice and bright. Now, I have a bit of a tip. Rarely are things in nature like 100% perfect colors. So when I blend in this color here, I'm not gonna blend it all the way. I'm gonna leave it a bit marbly because, oh, and I completely forgot. I'm gonna show you the wax paper. So I'm holding that for the moment. Ha. And I'm going to show you how I'm going to reserve the veins. All right, this is fun. So in my book, I keep this envelope up front where I keep all sorts of things, but some of it is pieces of pre-cut waxed paper. And I've marked the top, so I make sure that the wax is underneath. And I get a pencil, preferably nice and dull, and lay it over my painting part. And so what I want to do, so the veins in this leaf were lighter colored than the dark green. And in this particular leaf, just the central vein was light colored. So I'm drawing over it, literally transferring the wax there. And then I'm going to do it down here. And maybe on this one too. And this particular leaf, the other veins were very much so light. I might do a tiny bit and just maybe, but the veins were just really, really light. So let's see what happens when I now go back and color over. So even though I'm painting over it, it's refusing to accept the green. So it's reserving that vein nicely for me. And I don't have to worry about carefully doing it. So there's the, I'm painting over it and it's just popping right off. So that works really well. Shows it's just a really nice quick trick. I'm gonna do this one. Now, I don't want this underside to be the same color as the, it was a lighter color, so I'm not going to give it as much pigment. So I wanted to show a different color. In fact, that inside needs to be a little darker. So I'm actually touching a tiny bit of the indanthrone. Whoop, too much. And while it's still wet, I want to drop some of that indanthrone for darkness on the inside, since I'm trying to show that it was closed up a bit, where this is all open. So that's a really quick way to do color there. I might let this dry, and then I might do one other wash of green over this one to give it just a little bit more interest. Now over here, well, I don't have it, just a few more minutes. So let's look at that bloom. So you see how that's, Sai was saying earlier, see it didn't actually, this is the bloom part where it's spread out, and too much water, it's pushed all the pigment to the edges. Blooms also can look like cauliflower and stuff. So if you get blooms, it's just because you've got accidentally too much pigment. So on this, what I would do next is go back to, remember those pretty colored rocks. I'm going to want to do some peachy colored rock underpainting. I'm cleaning off my mixing yellow. So when I go off camera, it's because I'm dipping in my water and dabbing off my paintbrush. So I want some of that sandstony, cliffy, peachy color thing. More yellow, a tiny bit more magenta. I'm not mixing it all the way. I want it to be a little marbly. And I'm going to just dab that in. It's not going to be perfect. I want to leave bits and pieces open, because often in nature it's not like perfect. You don't want to like color in like you're doing a coloring book. This part, I want to push this into the back. So I'm going to use just a little Endanthron blue, which is dark blue. Maybe not how it looked in super real life, but I want to make sure that's not really prominent. I'm going to grab a little bit of that sandstone, because some of these peaks were sandstone. Not sandstone, actually, there it's granite. But I want to push that into the background. And then I want to get some of these, the juniper. And I'm not real precious sometimes about my palette. If there's just a little bit of color there, if I know I'm going to be mixing, I'll just go ahead and drop it in there. Now that's too bright green for the juniper, so I'm going to add a dab of the Endanthron to warm it up. Oops, ha, too much. Sometimes you just have to keep adding till you get it. See how that looks. And I want this to be fairly green, but I'm not going to fill it all the way in. See how I'm just kind of dabbing some of it in here. So I'm going to go in and, oops. Okay, see I blurked. It's lifting, so I can quickly fix that. Now I want to do these evergreens, which have even darker foliage, so I added more Endanthron. See how I'm not coloring it all the way in? I'm leaving it a bit marbly. And since I varied the color, you get a more sense of variation. Now I'm going to add some yellow over here, create a little bit lighter yellow, because I want this generic shrubbery that's in the background here. Be careful not to touch this here, because it's still wet and it'll bleed into it. You'll quickly learn what that means. Normally I would just wait till it's dry. So what I'm doing here is there, you see where I accidentally touched the evergreen? It was really wet, so I got a bit of a bleed. I'm rushing a bit here. I normally wouldn't be doing this until it dried, but I want to kind of demonstrate how to create these various levels. And so the next thing I would do, I probably would want a little bit more of the sandstone-y color. Oh, I just ruined my good yellow. Because there's some of these bits and rocks in here that I'm going to want to pull out later. So I'm going to let that dry. And then what I would do is I would come in and very lightly scribe some of the faraway juniper trees in here, and then add some shadows to the rocks. You see how I'm just not real precious about that? So like these rocks had really lovely shadows on the side. And I'm going kind of faster because I want to make sure we have plenty of time for questions. But this gives you a good idea of how I might approach this. The other thing I might do is when like this tree was dried, I'm going to wet it again with clear water. And then I might drop in some dark green in that wet spots to create shadows in the depth for that juniper tree. And that'll dry, that'll soak in and kind of dry. So I don't quite have time to finish this while we're watching. However, what I do have time to do, I might add a darker wash. I think I'm going to leave that leaf. I can demonstrate what will happen if I put a darker wash on one side so you can see how it changes the depth. And maybe I leave some shiny bits. This was a shiny leaf. So I'm not coloring it all in. So you can see how adding color upon color upon color after you dry adds a lot of depth and interest to something that you're painting. So we're coming up on toward the end, so I want to pop back and get some questions. But hopefully that gave you a taste. So Grace, you want to read me the chats?
We have what is that lovely set of ochres / natural earth pigments?
That is really cool. Okay, so don't blame me if your credit card starts smoking, okay? I'm serious. No, I'm totally serious. So these, most of these are from a little teeny tiny company in Colorado run by a husband and wife called Greenleaf and Blueberry. And I have bought, so they're gorgeous. I have bought quite a few of their paints. They make all of their paints by hand, and they're almost all earth pigment paints. And I've bought a ton of handmade paints off Etsy, and 90% of them, I'm here to tell you, are crap. They're got fillers, they're poorly mixed, and these are gorgeous. They're super expensive because someone is standing at a bench in Colorado hand mixing these paints with a muller. So you get what you pay for, and they make gorgeous ones. I made my own lapis lazuli from lapis pigment that I bought from the coolest paint shop on the planet. It's called Cornelison's in England. It's in London, and it's where all the pre-Raphaelite painters bought their paints and stuff. You go in and you're just like completely consumed and out of your brain with, yeah. And then like my American Express like was sending me alerts on my phone like large purchase, large purchase, large purchase. Yeah. So I bought lapis lazuli and real carmine red and all sorts of amazing stuff. And I mull my own paints as well. But that's another rabbit hole. So too much information, I'm sure. More questions?
Yes. Please remind us which colors to use to make brown.
Yes, so browns will come out of your 3 primaries. So whatever magenta, blue, cyan, and yellow you use, you mix those 3, you'll get a pretty brown, and you can vary the tone of the brown, like more yellow will be, you know, more sandstony, more red will be the darker, you know, an earthier brown, if you will. So those are on the handouts. So I emailed you the links this morning to, I created a special website, a web page on my website for this class. All these handouts and all that information about color mixing is in there too. So you'll have a PDF on that. And just play, you know, if you get frustrated and are not having a lot of luck, email me. You know, we can talk through like, okay, so what colors are you using? Because oftentimes if you end up with like really muddy, ucky colors, you think you're painting with a, you know, a red, a blue, or a magenta, a blue, and a yellow, but it's not doing what you think. It might be because maybe your blue is actually not a pure blue. It's actually a mix of several other colors. Most colors you buy are already pre-mixed other colors, so you don't know what's in them. You have to be like super into color theory to understand that, say, I can't even think of the name of a color of blue, you know, is actually already a mix of several other colors. There are very few pure pigments, and what I use are pure pigments. It's pure blue, pure yellow, pure magenta. So I always know what I'm gonna get. And that's just me though, that's just my thing. So just experiment until you find the mix that you really love. The thing that was fun about experimenting with the little earth pigments is when I paint with those, it ends up looking like really old fashioned, like, you know, daguerreotypes that have been painted in with just a few tints. So just experiment until you find something that you really like.
Yeah, that's what I liked about it.
So any other questions?
Yes. How do we make an object such as a very iridescent green beetle pop out?
Iridescence is fun. And I have to say, John Muir-Laws has an excellent tutorial on it. So the way iridescence works, I don't have time to do a tutorial on it because you have to let an underpainting dry. But the trick is, you paint, the bottom layer is going to be the jewel tone. So say you want the bright, let me find, hold on just a second, I'll show you an example. I think I can find this quickly. Hopefully I can find it quickly. So you paint, the bottom layer is the jewel tone you want. So it's either going to be like bright blue or bright yellow are the two most common. See if I can talk and do this at the same time. And then you do a couple of layers over that, and then you use lifting watercolor, and you actually end up pulling off pigment to show the bright underneath. And I will show you. Oh, hopefully I can find it. There it is. Okay, so screen share. I found it. Is this showing the beetles?
Yes.
Okay, so the beetle on top, the very bottom layer is a staining pigment called phthalo blue, which is PTHALO blue. And it's like this super scary color because it stains everything and it never comes up and it's super chemically. But you paint that on first. And then you paint that mixture of black that I use, which is burnt sienna and indanthrone. You paint that over until you can't see anything except the black, and then you slowly withdraw. You paint water on and slowly remove pigment until you can see the blue. And then the one at the bottom is bright yellow on the bottom, and then a mixture of dark green, and then use with a little bit of blue, and you slowly remove pigment until you can see the yellow, and it's like magic. That was really quick, but it takes a while. I can't demo it because everything has to dry in between. So super fun. Yeah, iridescence is super hard. So that's an advance. That's totally advanced. So it's hard. But check John Muir Law's. He has some great tutorials on that. So John Muir Law's book, The Law's Guide to Nature Drawing and Journaling, did I get that right? Is fantastic. It'll take you a year to go through it. It's huge, it's dense, it's unbelievable. It takes forever to work through it though. And you know, there's everything that you could possibly want to learn is in there. So that's the super next step for going deep in this type of drawing. So I highly recommend that book. So, oh boy, there's like 9 chats. So have we got all the questions in the chats?
No, we haven't.
Sure.
We have, is it best to paint light to dark if we're going to layer colors over each?
Is it best to what?
Paint light to dark if we're going to layer colors.
Correct. Yes, that's the easiest and best way to do that for sure. Because it's easier to add than take away. So that's a really good way to think of it.
And then we have suggestions on water droplets on leaves.
Yeah, again, that's a little bit advanced and I could do a demo, but it would take a long time. Again, you have to let layers dry. I can send you a handout I did for a class this spring on doing water droplets. But John Muir Laws also has an excellent tutorial on that, which I took mine from. So, but I'm gonna write that down. I'll add that to the website. Okay, more? Because then I want to finish up with one last thing before we close up. So let's take a couple more questions.
Do we have time to show how to paint with the water brush?
I did a little bit, but I can show some more at the end. I mean, you paint the same way. The only difference is in how you clean it out. You squeeze it and wipe it on the cloth rather than dipping it in water. And that's really the only difference. You just have to get used to it being wetter than a normal brush. It's a little harder to do dry brush technique with, well, it's a lot harder to do dry brush technique with a water brush. Dry brush technique is meaning you have a ton of pigment on your paintbrush, and when you swipe it over the surface, it's very like uneven, but water brushes tend to always be throwing water into your bristles, so it's much harder to get that lovely you know, wobbly look with a water brush, in my opinion. It just takes practice. So. Is that it?
Roseann,
Questions? Yes?
I don't really have a question, but I might make a comment. I've done more watercoloring than I have the drawing and the nature side, but I'm one that has impatience in mixing colors. So I just might make the comment that you can get a set that's a little bit bigger, but not too big, really. It's very small. In fact, I just got this. I'm used to a very long one.
Is that the shrinking?
No, it's not. I'm sad to say, but I found it at Ross's, which is a outlet store. It's actually looks like Christian Bibling, whatever. So I took out a lot of the paints and put in what I wanted, because it was Peebo, which I don't know anything about. But that allowed me to pick my greens particularly, and a few that gave me a little more browns in the nature journaling, because there's so much of that in the journaling. I don't know, it looks like I'm lost.
No, that's
yeah,
a great tip.
Yeah, so that's just a tip. If they get frustrating and remembering and figuring out, then just go and add 2 or 3, 4 other colors that they know they like, particularly in the greens. Greens in nature is huge.
Yeah, they are, which is why I was like talking about marbling and, you know, just,
Now I have a friend who only does the mixing and really likes it. So it's a personality difference in how you want to go about your painting, but they should feel the freedom to do that, because I think it makes it easier if you kind of use your natural tendencies. There you go.
Absolutely. Yeah, if you get bogged down in mixing, don't worry about it. Just buy a bunch of greens and stick them in your own.
Actually, I found out I don't need many greens. It's only about 2 that I really like. The rest of them, not so much.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just a few little final tips, not very many. If you're overwhelmed, Christine Elder, I love this little tip here that she does. Cut your own little viewfinder and do a micro view of something if you're feeling overwhelmed with doing an entire scene. Love that. So you can keep a little viewfinder like that in the back of your journal and use it to focus in on something very specific. Like this, taking a scene and creating a view like this. And then that's what you paint. So I'll back that up real quick. So instead of like, oh my gosh, do I need to paint this entire thing? No, pull out one view, or it could be the rock or whatever. And that's what you would focus in on. So use a viewfinder to help yourselves focus in. I already mentioned the colorway or color palette, which is a really fun way, especially if you don't have time to color in everything. At least throw the colors up on your journal on the side or the bottom or something, so that you capture that, and they can become a really, really fun feature in your page too. And then different views. So I talked about this earlier in the weekend. So remember to go up above and think of fun ways to express things from a different viewpoint. So this is an above view of Costa's hummingbird working his territory. Or you might do a map and do an illustration around each point of the map. And I was sharing this with one of our members who is I don't think a marine biologist, right, but a biologist who specializes in the waterways of the West and lakes. And this is a way to envision what's below the water by pretending there's a glass holding back the water. And then I drew the threatened leopard frog and the water bug. And so that's another way to view something differently. So I'm just throwing these out there as, remember to think outside the box and come up with fun ways to view things differently. this was a fun project where we were challenged by Kate Rudder in a workshop to have 10 different views of something, starting from the micro all the way out to the solar system view, which was totally fun. So again, think of fun ways to view things, not just what you're seeing, but maybe what you might see. And then finally, there are so many fun ways to divide up. I saw Marty was already doing this with dividing her pages up into squares or columns. One thing to keep in mind, I want to throw this out there, if you add stuff to your journal like feathers or seeds or whatever, that can be not a good thing if you're not really careful. For one thing, feathers are not really legal to collect. Migratory Bird Act, it's not legal to collect feathers. So maybe draw the feathers, and then if you do collect things like seeds or soil or whatever, make sure it's sealed, sterilize it in the microwave or oven, and don't throw it out anywhere because that can spread invasive species. So just be careful with stuff like that. So, to wrap up, we do have an optional next weekend on Saturday, August 8th at 10 o'clock. We will have a brief check-in I want you to spend the week trying to get this as part of your daily routine, and we'll check in and see how you are doing with what you've learned so far. So please join in that. I'll be sending the Zoom link out to that as well. And these resources will be on the website. I sent the link earlier, John Muir Law's website, Mark Taro Homes. I'll put these all out there. And I have lots of free tutorials on my website as well, exploringoverland.com field arts. So thank you all. You guys were really an amazing group. I've really enjoyed it. My biggest regret is, of course, that we weren't together in person, but on the other hand, it would have been quite impossible, really, because we're all over the country, and we can't be spending thousands of dollars to travel around to get together, and plus the carbon footprint's smaller, right? So we can all be happy with that, and have had a chance to at least start out. And does anyone want to comment, say things? I'd love to hear from people before we sign off. Go ahead and unmute.
This is Sai. I just really want to say how much I enjoy that you have managed to retain your childlikeness into middle age, and I just adore that. So it has been fun. Never mind that I've also learned stuff that is going to be really applicable. So if you come back to the East Coast, I would love to meet you. Thank you so very much.
Coming. We're just really bummed we're not going to be there this fall. We normally come east for the Overland Expo, and completely bummed, but we'll be there next year for sure. So.
Well, then I will have to make sure that I go. All right. Take care, and thank you so very much. And really nice.
So much fun. I love it. Yeah. Thank you.
This is Catherine. I'll just also want to say thank you. And it is interesting because I went out this morning to a park nearby my house with a pond that has beautiful lilies and lotuses, and they're just gorgeous. So lots of people are out there taking photographs always. But there are a lot more people out now because of the pandemic. And people were asking me what I was doing, because I was drawing, and I got into a number of really nice conversations. I actually was commenting how nice it was to be doing this workshop. It's one upside of the pandemic is that, this is something that most of us would not have been able to have done with you because we would not have traveled to Arizona. And so it was really fun to have those conversations. The other thing that I was more cognizant of, because it's not like the first time I've been there, is listening to people's conversations because I didn't have earbuds on or anything. I was just hearing what people were talking about. And because the lotuses are in various stages, from just the buds still to the seed pods dried up and everything in between, and it's just crazy. People were like trying to understand what was going on with them. So they were having conversations. So they were like observing. It was amazing to listen to these people who don't know anything, observing and pondering. They were like, I wonder if it's this, I wonder if it's that. And somebody asked me actually what they were. So it was really cool to listen to. And then somebody with some kids, they caught a dragonfly, didn't kill it, but caught a dragonfly to show the kids. It was really cute. So it was, and there were some ducks swimming around that were neat that people were watching. So it was really nice to see people kind of like getting out from their TV and looking at stuff.
Actually think I just wrote an essay for in fact it'll be on the Natural History Institute eventually. I called it Loving Nature in the Time of COVID. Those of you who have read Gabriel Marquez will recognize Love in the Time of Cholera. But I've noticed the same thing, and I actually think I always hesitate to say it's a good thing because there are so many people dying, which is not a good thing. But there's also many, many people turning to nature as solace, and that is such an important thing. And yeah, I also getting together with people from all over the world to enjoy this has been a bonus I never expected. In fact, in January, I had a conversation with colleagues at Tumamok Hill about our future classes, and somebody said, well, we really need to offer online classes. This is pre-COVID. And I was like, no, this is nature. Get your butts outside. We teach nature journaling outside. And then of course I had to completely change my tune. And now I'm really glad I did. And especially I'll share with you guys that I've had 3 or 4 people contact me who've taken my free workshops who are disabled, and they said, I could never go on a safari to Botswana. I could never go hiking in Yosemite. And I love your workshops because they're allowing me to do things I've never dreamed of doing, you know, so that's a huge bonus to this. So someone asked, several people asked in the chat, will I be doing more? And resoundingly, yes. I'm developing a lot more resources for teaching online, and especially the virtual field trips, which are really super fun.
But you do an amazing job at it. It's not an easy thing to do, having seen people do it not well during this time. Seriously, not well. Even things that don't involve art, just like, yeah. So you do an amazing job. I'm very impressed. Thank you.
Well, I'll be doing a lot more of the, oh, where are we going next? I'm trying to decide. I'm trying to develop my own 360-degree views and videos too. But I don't know, we're thinking about maybe Isle Royale, because I want to do wolves. And by the way, Catherine, you could totally sell video, like a webcam of your cat relaxing. It's like my blood pressure goes down looking at your cat. I'm like, that's my next
mastered it. I actually share that with my mom to help her calm down. I'll send her little videos. Yes. It's amazing.
That's my next life. I'm like, yeah, I think I'm gonna get up and move 2 inches. Oh. Sweet. Any other things to share? So Isle Royale. Be sure to, wait, what is YouTube Nature RX? What's that? Oh, you're unmute.
Hey, okay. I got it. Okay. I saw that first. At my Sierra Club. It's a short little video. It's called Nature RX, and it's an absolute stitch. It's a tongue-in-cheek kind of advertisement, using the idea of nature as a prescription, and you'll just laugh. It's so great, and it's for everybody who's into nature. It's just really fun. So thanks a lot, Roseann. This has been so great. Thank you.
Okay,
really
good.
enjoyed it.
I want you guys to spend the week, remember to try to make this part of your everyday routine, and check back in on Saturday, even if you can come for 5 minutes or whatever. Just check in and say, hey, yeah, I did it. I did 5 entries, even if it's just do your metadata. What was the weather? What was your cat doing? How are your figs? Then that's great. Do not make this nature journaling a chore that you feel like you have to do, so it becomes something you avoid. Make it something that is joyful and something that you love. And so don't make it stressful. We have enough stress right now. But do try to do it a little bit. And each time you do it, it'll become more addictive. And feel free to email, whatever, text, if you have questions or want tips or having struggles or whatever. That's what we're all here for.
Thank you so much, Roseann.
You're welcome, everybody. It was fun.
Filled in a big gap with all of the metadata. No one has ever exposed me to information like that, and it's really important.
Yay! I get teased a little bit good-naturedly on the Nature Journal Club, like, oh yeah, metadata.
Well, one of the reasons I don't journal as much is because everybody I know does the really fancy drawings. And that's only half the story.
Yeah, and I mean, fancy drawings are great, but it's not the only way. And sometimes you just got to give yourself permission to just do a scribble or not draw at all. Just write or do numbers. And I'm really digging Sai's bird. I'm still like delving into your bird song thing. It's like, whoa, that's so cool.
Sorry, that wasn't me. I was listening to them, but Marty's the one who's coming up with the.
Oh, Marty, sorry. I gave Marty.
Oh, no, we're so indistinguishable.
Yeah.
All right. Well, everybody, we'll see you next Saturday, I hope. And do check in and let me know if you have any questions. I'll hang out for just a few more minutes, and I'll be posting the recording and all of the resources on the website, including the chat. So you'll get the chat as well.
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much, Roseann, and goodbye to all of you guys, and see you maybe next Saturday.
It was nice meeting all of you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Everyone take care.
Bye-bye.
Fine, thank you.
I can't hear them.
Uh-oh.
Hey,
Did you turn off your computer audio?
well, you said earlier you yes, did, I did. Sorry, I did. Hey, you guys.
Hello.
Hi.
Hey, Roseann, I just wanted, I mean, this could be like a fest of, like Roseann love. But one thing that I wanted to just say was that, you know how Sai was saying that she didn't want to waste anything at the very beginning of tonight?
Yeah.
And sometimes what I do is if I have a little pan of like, excess, how do I get this to show? Like excess ink that I've mixed up, I wouldn't take this out in the field with me necessarily, but in a park, at my house, whatever, yes, I could take a rag and just wipe it out. But what I often will do, and I wanted to explain this or show this to people, but then I didn't want to take up a huge amount of time, is I'll go in with blank pages and just get some, just put color on pages.
Oh, so you're like prepping the back.
Exactly, because one of the things that you said, what are we so afraid of when we draw is, the blank page. So it's already got stuff on it. And let me see, where's one? I mean, it's really light, right? It's very watered down. But then tonight I did one while we were in class, and all of this was from just little
bits of leftover.
Yes, little bits of color and value and stuff. And so, you know, when you just paint without, for me, it's that white page makes me want it to be so pristine. So
that breaks the tension, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know, it's just a way of working, you know, that people might enjoy knowing about. So maybe I'll mention it next week when we all gather.
Yeah, please remember that. That would be great. Because yeah, I'm all about not wasting as well. I don't like that. So.
Yeah, I know. Me too. So anyway, this has been delightful. Grace, you are a wonderful, and I can't believe you're only 19. You're like so mature and you got it going on. It's really cool. So anyway, you guys have a great night.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.
Great. Yay. Okay, so we just have next weekend. Yay.
Yep.